if I can talk now. That would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
We could all just meditate. I'm okay with that.
You can all what?
Just meditate.
Meditate? I'm sure everyone would love it if I called for a 25-minute meditation. That would make people really happy. There is only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. There is only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. There is only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. So, do you remember this from last week? It was a quote from Charles, the end of a quote from Charles Fillmore. He said, by using this creative power of your own thought, you will change that which seemed evil into good, and divine love will pour its healing balm over all. I find something remarkably comforting in that sentence. Divine love will pour its healing balm over all. Now, we talked about pausing and breathing in and living peacefully by not allowing our minds to run away with us. You know, we kind of used being in the airport and staying in grace as an example. And we spoke of managing our mind chatter in a way that demonstrates the person that we want to be in the world, rather than the one that reacts and responds impulsively and out of anger sometimes. And our reminder for this week was to just press pause. Now, there was a couple of things that came up that were really cute last week after that. Mary told me that she kept seeing this, press pause, which I thought was very cool. And then Karen here, Karen Reed told me that she saw her kitty pressing pause like this. And I thought, how comforting is that motion, you know? But I have to tell you, I was sitting in my office this week several times, like picking up books and working on this week's talk throughout the week, and I'd pick up a book and I would just do open it and see where it opened, or I'd start reading it. And every one that I picked up had the same message this week. Press pause, slow down, wait, be here now. You know, I told you last week I had sort of been drawn to reading The Power of Now again, and last week I couldn't find it. And this week, the first day I walked into my office, it was the first book I saw on my shelf. And I just thought, that was just weird. But I will say this, it is much easier to talk about it than to practice it. And lucky me, I get to talk about it. Then I get to live it. So Sue Monk Kidd also wrote a book. Carol Humphreys showed up in my office with a book this week, and she says, oh, listen to this. And it was like this whole message again. And so I borrowed the book from her, and the whole book is like press pause again. It's called When the Heart Waits. And in it, she tells the story of a friend of hers who had hit the middle of her life. And she was finding herself in one of those places. You know, I call them the periods of discontentment. Anybody know these? The spots where nothing quite feels right and you can't quite put your finger on it. Does anybody else ever have this experience? Like your skin doesn't fit quite right, and nothing's quite making you happy, and you're not. Sometimes you're angry or sad, or you just walk around with like this melancholy cloud over your head, where you try to fake it through so nobody really knows that, but inside you're sort of in this weird space. So her friend, she's in this space that she calls slogging about in her midlife swamp. And she felt like she had reached the bottom of that. And she started to look at her life and how she was living it. And she was a very successful business person and had, by all outward appearances, this really amazing life. But she was starting to ask this question, which sounded a lot like, why bother? Why am I doing this? You know, the question that has been coming up for me lately, I'm going to turn 50 this year, and that's starting to bug me a little bit, I think. So the question that's been coming up for me is, when is it in midlife that you get to do something really stupid and you get a pass because you blame it on your midlife crisis? Laura doesn't particularly love that question, but I'm sort of liking it. Motorcycle is my future. But anyway, so she decided that she needed to take some time and take a vacation and take a break at least. And so she went to Maine and she went walking out in the woods for a few days. And she says while she's walking, she found herself begging and pleading with God for answers and to feel better and make me feel better. Why don't I feel better? I have all this amazing thing in my life. Why don't I feel better? And then she realized that she was praying with the same sort of feverishness and intensity that she brought to her whole life and to her work and to her home life and everything else, and that all of that sort of feverishness and craziness wasn't really working for her anymore. And so she started to get a little quieter while walking, as one generally does, and she came upon a spider in the trees. And you know, when you're out there in the woods, they could make really big webs, and so this one was actually building a web between two trees. And she says she couldn't explain why, but she stopped to watch. And she just sat there watching this weaving and flowing and up and down motion. And it occurred to her that she had not done anything so irrelevant, so without a schedule and without a purpose in a really long time. So she sits there and she's watching the spider loop and weave and loop and weave and spin. And she says the most amazing thing happened. That voice, you know, the one that you hear when you're quiet and when you're still for a moment, that one that knows more than you do. Well, mine knows more than I do anyway. She said that she heard it say, "This is the way you are supposed to pray. Be quiet and still so that you can begin to see the thing that God is already weaving. Be quiet and still so that you can see the thing that God is already weaving." Waiting and listening. And I thought, how many often in the stories that we listen to, you know, we just had Easter and Mary, for instance, sitting at Jesus' feet while Martha is running around, you know, and doing all the busyness of the cooking and cleaning, and Jesus in the garden sitting for days, and Buddha under a tree sitting for way more days. You know, Buddha sat there until he almost was emaciated. He sat there for so long. It seems like that a lot of the big answers come in stillness and in silence. The Buddhist master Osho wrote, "There is certainly a deep magic, almost a miracle, when you are in silence, in trust, and in love, just waiting." There is something to waiting. And waiting is not popular with me. I have to say, it is not my strong suit. But I love this idea. Be quiet and still so that you can begin to see the thing God is already weaving. And that really strikes a chord with me. Now, have you ever had that experience where when you do stop and you kind of plug in, the answers are already there? Just like that. You know, and like they've been waiting for you. In a way, like the universe said yes before you even know what you wanted. In my case, the universe is usually saying duh. But there are times when we are not ready to wait. When we are too busy, or maybe we're just not really ready for that step in our spiritual journey. You know, and all of us have our own journey and our own speed and our own path. And you know, often when you hear stories about transformation, people use butterflies as an example. You know, butterflies, they just very naturally, you know, caterpillars, they just very naturally, they go into this cocoon state and they do melt away and they become these beautiful blossoming things, and that's all wonderful. And we feel guilty because we're not that easy. You know, and like caterpillars are smarter than us somehow. But I learned something new this week. I learned this word, diapause. Diapause is a word that describes what happens with some caterpillars who apparently aren't ready and they decide to wait. And they stay caterpillars for much longer than the masses do because it's their journey. Now, the dictionary definition of diapause is a period of hormonally controlled quiescence, especially in immature insects characterized by cessation of growth and reduction of metabolic activity, often occurring seasonally or when environmental conditions are unfavorable. Now, I have a little bit of understanding of hormonally controlled reduction of metabolic activity, but I wouldn't call it diapause. But I thought it was really interesting that even in nature, sometimes things are not ready for that total transformation. Sometimes they're ready and sometimes they're not. The difference is likely the level of pressure that one puts on oneself. Now, I'm guessing that caterpillars are not crawling around feeling guilty because they're supposed to be something they're not. Or because they've seen some vision of something that they're supposed to turn into instantly. Because that's what we do to ourselves. They understand that it's the journey, it is the process of opening up and claiming and expanding that is important. Now, all of that made me think about Jana and the mountain climb. So, while I think it's going to be really cool for her to get to the top, that's not the important part. I think somehow, and I'm not even sure that the climb that day is the important part. I'm sure it will be for her, and she'll get to talk about that at some point, because I'm not going to take her whole story. She's like, that's my next talk, is the climb. But I think my hunch, if I'm allowed to have one about it, is that when she looks back on this experience, the journey will be about coming to the place in her life where she was able to say, I believe. Not only do I believe that I can make the climb, more importantly, I believe I can start the journey to get ready to make the climb. And taking the steps before the climb to turn that belief into a fact. Because there's a shift between our belief and our fact. And the process of prayer, the process of unfolding belief, starts with an affirmation. I believe I can do this, be this, have this, experience this in my life. This is what I desire. I believe something. But it isn't lying in bed every day just saying, I believe, I believe, I believe, and waiting for it to fall through the ceiling. It is the stillness where we find the inspiration. And in the stillness, we hear the action that we might take. And the motion that we are pulled to in our lives. It's the weaving and meeting the weaving and the looping. But then there is the time to move and to infuse that belief with life itself. And now whether that's learning something new or practicing something or just trying something new out, but in the stillness you can hear what God is already weaving. In the stillness, I'm guessing that Jana and Jim both heard a call to supporting this organization that they're supporting by doing this. I'm not guessing that Jana was laying in bed one day going, I think I'll start climbing mountains. Because it wasn't about the climb. It's about the experience of preparing for that, but it's also about the experience of supporting a group of people that she believes in so strongly. So it's all weaves together in this weaving, and the opportunity that showed up to do that. Now, for me, usually what God is weaving is way bigger than what I've thought of. But it's not until I plug into that vision that I understand that, because before that, for me, usually there is a lot of pushing really big rocks up hills and having them roll back at me and pushing them some more. And that's not really weaving, that's a tug of war. And the thing is, we are giant balls of energy, that's just what we are, that's how we're made up. And now and again we have to plug in to just fill it up. Pema Chodron said, the truth you believe and cling to makes you unavailable to hear anything new. If Jana was willing to cling to the belief that she couldn't climb, or that she was too old, or that she had waited too long to get in that kind of shape, or that she couldn't do it in the amount of time, if she was willing, if she wanted to continue to believe those things, she would be unavailable to hear anything else. But what she has heard is, I believe. And she has taken the steps to do that. And that's just an example for all of us to believe and move. And what I wanted to say is, what if all you heard was God? You know, because she shows up in the most unusual ways, really. We were, I hear God a lot, mostly because I'm looking for talk material, you know, so everything turns into a story I can use. But when you kind of approach it, it's not when you kind of approach life like that, like everything is potentially a spiritual story. Everything potentially has a spiritual message in it. It's kind of amazing how many spiritual messages there are. So last year we were at a concert at Avo's. I think it was Carrie Newcomer. Is that who we were? Was it Carrie Newcomer we went to see? Yes, Diapause. But anyway, the team does a lot of her music. And she was telling a story about being at a retreat or a camp or something, because I don't actually remember all of the specifics of the story. But she was telling a story of meeting these men who were there to on a fly fishing trip. And she didn't know how to do it. She'd never been fly fishing, but she'd seen people do it. She thought it was really beautiful. And you know, there's something about watching fly fishing. It's that same kind of thing, you know, swish and swoop and touch. Has anybody watched fly fishing? Like A River Runs Through It is one of the most beautiful movies ever made, because there's just these moments of swish and loop and silence and this practiced motion of swishing. And so they offer to teach her how to do this, and she gets up with them at the crack of O Dark 30 to, you know, one of the reasons that, like, I don't fish. But, and she goes out and tries it, and she's not all that successful because it's something that actually takes a lot of practice to learn how to do. But she gets very mesmerized by this motion of these fishermen. And she just stays and watches them for as long as they're out there, the swish and loop and touch. The lightest touch on the water, just swish. And they didn't catch a thing that day. And so as they were going back to the camp, she asked them if they felt like it was a waste of time because they hadn't caught anything, or if they felt bad that they didn't have any fish, and they just kind of laughed. And this one guy laughed and he says, you know, I don't even usually keep the fish. You know, I usually throw most of them back. It's not about the fish, it's about being there in the moment. He told her, when you fly fish, there isn't room to think about anything else, because all you think about is the quiet and the motion, and you're in the motion and the sound of the river, which you can probably hear right now. Now, to me, that sounds like prayer, communion with that which is larger than ourselves. You know, I have a friend who does most of his prayer while gardening. He says having his hands in the dirt centers him, and he's able to be in stillness with his hands moving. And you know, that's true for a lot of us, and that's another one of these places where we give ourselves a lot of grief because we think that we hear about meditation and that we're supposed to be able to sit in the chair for an hour and not think anything. Right. Anybody can do that? Can anyone do that for an hour? Right. Can you? You're awesome. I practice meditation a lot, and sometimes I can do it for half an hour really quiet, but honestly, you know, stuff creeps in. And for me, you know, God showed up in the telling of that story because I don't remember most of the details of it, but I can't tell you how many times when my head has been really full and I've been really busy that I've heard her voice just say swish and loop and touch. And I've never even fly fished. We work so hard for it sometimes, you know, that the only real meditation or prayer is that total silence and stillness. And what I would say is that if moving your hands stills your mind, then that is prayer also. And for many of us, you know, we feel like failures if we can't do the hour in the chair. The quiet place for a lot of us is, and the total stillness in our mind is one where we have a practiced motion with our hands that allows us to be still inside. Laura tells me that the quietest her mind is when she plays music that she knows already. You know, it's knitting and gardening and painting and playing music and biking or climbing a mountain. Just one motion, one step after the next. The beauty of being uniquely human is that we don't all have to do it the same way. We don't have to be in the same way. You know, and we look at the spiritual masters, and the spiritual masters were all people who could sit for 3 to 5 to 7 days under a tree. Our spiritual mastery